We also are joined by Republican Congressman from Idaho, Raul Labrador, former White House Chief of Staff for President Clinton, John Podesta, and our friend GOP strategist Mike Murphy. Welcome to everybody. So, yes, I want to get to as much as we can, including some of this Republican fallout a little bit later. Andrea, bottom line, this furious debate and new facts that we've gotten here on Benghazi and Susan Rice this morning for me.
Mike Rogers, the Republican chair, threw a hand grenade in the middle of this table when he suggested that the President of the United States might have had prior knowledge before the election of what was going on with David Petraeus, that Eric Holder was aware of it, the Attorney General, and that it's not credible that Eric Holder would not have told the President. This is going to raise a lot of questions. Holder is going to be called to attention on the Hill. The other thing is clearly the disconnect between what the senators believe, which was that there was not an intelligence failure, but there was certainly a failure then to follow up. Did the State Department, why did the State Department not increase security, not ask for more security after the intelligence community made it very clear? And was there politicization? Dianne Feinstein says no. All of this is now going to be examined ad infinitum. And now you've also got an IG investigation into whether Petraeus misused personal assets or resources, official assets, to further his relationship. And if you look at the way he lived with all of the entourage that he still maintained as CIA director, I don't know how they close that down. That is a very fraught with difficulty.
Isn't it interesting? I mean, just on the Petraeus thing, there's something so intensely personal about it in terms of people's reactions, Mike Murphy, that should he have been investigated? Should he have resigned? I mean, listen to Senator Dianne Feinstein talk about, hey, you know, instead of really coming down hard on him, we got to think about how hard it is to come off of command in a war zone back to a civilian job, and that readjustment is tough and could have led him to stray. She's not making an excuse, but people really have an intense personal reaction to this.
Yeah, no, it's a big, complicated thing when you have a great patriot like that who served the country so well. But as a point of honor, he either broke the rules at the CIA, or if it becomes true there was an affair when he was in command of the forces, he really broke the rules there. He denies it. I tend to believe him. I think he did the right thing. But whether or not now we have to investigate for a year the details of who paid for the coffee at Starbucks and the secret date, shut it down. He took the honor bullet and repaired the intelligence
John,
service.
We've lived through this with President Clinton and impeachment and Monica Lewinsky, and there is a view out there of, why do we need to know all of this stuff about emails between the Kelly sisters and General Allen and some of these other details?
Well, if Aaron Sorkin wrote it, you wouldn't believe the story. But, I think Mike's right. I think that, we know what we know. There are legitimate issues around Benghazi. I think this really ought to get shut down. With respect to what Andrew said about Mike Rogers tossing this hand grenade in the table, I would note he did it with zero evidence. In 1993, back to the Clinton era, Andrew, remember this, I recommended strict protocols between the Justice Department and the White House, which were implemented. I'm sure they've changed to some extent, but there is a reason why the Justice Department doesn't talk to the White House about ongoing active investigations. I think that President Obama ought to direct the Attorney General to obviously review those and report to him about whether they could be improved. But there are very good reasons why the Justice Department doesn't talk to the White House about investigations.
Congressman, I haven't heard from you so far this morning. Weigh in on what you've heard so far.
Well, I think it's interesting to see that the Justice Department may have not talked to the president, but they had a duty to talk to the intelligence committees, and they didn't. And if you remember last week, I think Dianne Feinstein was very upset because nobody talked to her. And I think Dianne Feinstein is actually going to be the key to finding out what's happening here, because she's not happy. She's trying to defend the administration right now, but she's not happy that as the committee chairman, nobody talked to her about this investigation. I want to get back to Ambassador Rice for a second, though. Lindsey Graham's absolutely right. She was misleading on your show. And she was misleading on every single show that she appeared. On your show, she said, we have decimated Al-Qaeda. If you remember that, right after that clip that you showed, she emphasized that we have decimated Al-Qaeda. She emphasized not just once, but 2 or 3 times on your show that this was a response to a hateful and offensive video. She wanted the narrative to be something different than what the intelligence community was telling her after she went.
Again, I think that will not stand without being rebutted particularly this issue of if she was working off talking points where the terror element was taken out. Why was that the case? And the intelligence chairs do not agree with the assessment that somehow she was misleading. And I think that's important for people watching this morning, that debate will continue. And, of course, it's adamantly denied by the president and others that she would willfully mislead, or what Senator Graham said, wanted to somehow, cover up or make a political point. Tom, if you can sort of catch all of these things together, this sort of human reaction to Petraeus, the impact on the national security team, at a time when this Benghazi question is coming up in such a furious way.
Well, I want to go back first to Petraeus. I think Petraeus exhibited a singular act of leadership when he summoned the country for the surge that saved Iraq from really going into a death spiral. It would have been a great disaster for American foreign policy. At the same time, though, that surge in Iraq coincided with a Sunni Muslim surge of their own, driven entirely for their own reasons, to break with al-Qaeda, side with the United States. It was the combination of our surge and the Sunni uprising that made that success. We completely overread that, is my belief, and Petraeus turned that into a counterterrorism strategy that he said, I did it in Iraq, now I can do it in Afghanistan. That same thing has been a complete failure in Afghanistan, precisely because there was no Afghan surge. We keep training Afghans to fight, okay? Every time I hear that, I'm thinking, who in the world has to train Afghans to fight? Okay? Anytime you're training Afghans to fight, you're in the wrong place. So what worked in Iraq was a failure in Afghanistan, and Petraeus has to take responsibility for that, I believe, because he's partly responsible. He and the other military brass who rolled Obama, basically, kept putting pressure on him to repeat in Afghanistan what did not work in Iraq. At the same time about Libya. And again, these are two stories are tied together like this. We have completely over-militarized our foreign policy. Our foreign policy is all about numbers of troops and generals. We forget they are diplomats. They're diplomats that go to dangerous places, and sometimes, David, they get killed. It is a tragedy. To me, Libya is not a scandal. It's a tragedy. It's the story of I think, incredibly courageous ambassador who wanted to work with the people on the ground and who produced something we have not seen since the Arab uprising, which is masses of Libyans on their own coming out to defend and praise our ambassador. Again, precisely that kind of authentic surge that makes something possible. Precisely what's missing in Afghanistan.
All right, let me get a break in here. I want to come back, continue this, talk about the future of the Republican Party, just as the president is trying to negotiate with Republicans to avoid the fiscal cliff. More with our roundtable right after this. We're back. Mike Murphy, the fallout from Mitt Romney's discussion that basically Obama gave gifts to minority groups. That's how he got reelected. This is the time when the party's trying to figure out where it's going.
Well, unfortunate comment. I think we ought to have a rule that if you lose a presidential election, you get a pass for a week because it's like a bender you're coming off.
Or don't talk to donors.
Look, there's a huge donor revolt going on. I mean, look, we have now lost the popular vote in 5 of the last 6 presidential elections. This is an existential crisis for the Republican Party, and we have to have a brutal discussion about it. We alienate young voters because of gay marriage. We have a policy problem. We alienate Latinos, the fastest growing voter group in the country, because of our fetish on so-called amnesty when we should be for a path to immigration. And we've lost our connection to middle-class economics. We also have an operative class, unfortunately, a lot of which is incompetent. We don't know how to win. So this isn't about new software in the basement of the RNC. It's not about a few Spanish language radio ads. It's a fundamental rethink that begins with policy, because the country's changing, and if we don't modernize conservatism, we can go extinct. The numbers are the numbers.
And Congressman, I've talked to other Republicans who say the problem with Romney is that he doesn't get it. I mean, it didn't take long for them to turn on the former nominee and say, unfortunately, this point of view was something that he had in the course of the campaign.
Well, let's start out by saying that Romney was a good man. Anybody who knows Romney understands that he's a good man, that he would have been a good president, but he didn't know how to communicate the message of conservatism. And I agree with Mike a little bit, but we need to be careful that we don't completely shift the party. We don't need 2 liberal parties in Washington, D.C. We need 1 conservative party and 1 liberal party. I think the problem that Romney had throughout the campaign is that he couldn't talk about conservatism like conservatives talk. As I heard somebody say, he talked about conservatism as if it was a second language to him. There are things about the conservative movement that actually, we believe in small government, but we also believe in the individual. There are too many Republicans here in Washington, D.C., and they're actually defending big business. They're defending the rich. I didn't become a Republican to defend the rich. And what we need to understand is that big business loves big government because they get all the goodies from big government. They get less competition. The more that government grows, the more that big business actually benefits from the tax code and from the regulations and from all those.
John, on the other side of this, you were at the White House this week meeting with the president, part of the progressive groups, stressing an agenda. Where is your sense? Is this a president ready, as President Bush said, to spend his political capital and fight hard, or does he see his mandate for compromise, and that mean give up some?
Look, I think the quality of this election, the big loss of Hispanics and Asian voters, young voters, is a significant story. But the big story in this election was that Obama won on the economy. People thought that Romney was competent. But when in the exit polls they asked whether his economic policies favored the wealthy, 53 to 34 people said yes. And I think that Obama came into that meeting with a tremendous amount of confidence and energy that he had put the question before the American people. 60% of the American people said yes, as part of this fiscal cliff deal, taxes have to go up on the wealthy, and he goes in with great strength, more leverage, and I think he'll get a good deal at the end of the day.
I think they'll get a punting deal, but I want to quickly respond to one thing, because it's very fashionable now to beat up Romney, and he made an unfortunate comment after the election. But the biggest problem that Romney had was the Republican primary. That's what's driving the Republican brand right now to a disaster, and we've got to get a kind of a party view of America that's not right out of Rush Limbaugh's Dream Journal. We got
and
reality.
Congressman, look, the Tea Party. What's the future of the Tea Party? You know, you heard the likes of Bill Kristol saying, you know, can't we should give up some of this protection of tax cuts for wealthier Americans. Are you prepared to give up on that particular point to get a larger deal, which includes cutting government back significantly?
I'm not, if what it means is that we're going to raise taxes and we're not going to decrease any spending. If you remember that moment in the primary where they asked all 10 candidates,
right, the 10 to 1,
the 10 to 1, I would have answered the question different. I would have raised my hand and I would have said, yes, I am willing to do it if the $10 in spending cuts happen today. Because what happens in Washington, D.C. is that we do increase in taxes today, and we promise that there's going to be spending cuts 10 years from now. And it never happens. It didn't happen under Reagan. It didn't happen under Bush. And it's not going to happen again if we're not willing to do that.
And that's why they are talking about some sort of trigger mechanism which would be enforcing, because there is agreement all around that Boehner wants a deal, the Speaker wants a deal, but he cannot sell a deal. Even with the goodwill that he thinks he and the president have on that right now, unless there is real Graham-Rudman type, real requirements that these things go in simultaneously. And that's what Jim Baker wrote about recently, who's had that experience of fashioning exactly that kind of deal.
Well,
I think it's really important, though,
that
that
can't cut spending in the future. You can raise taxes with one Congress. It takes 5 Congresses to cut spending.
I just think it's really important, though, that we keep the focus on growth. Not taxes,
yes.
not spending cuts. You know, that the goal here is to get our growth from 1+% between 1 and 2% up to 3 and 4%. If we don't get growth going, none of this is going to matter at all. And I think it's really important as the president frames this, that he frames his goal as growth, and therefore I need this kind of tax increase for these people. I need this kind of spending cuts here because it's going to leverage this kind of growth. But
that's new. But that's new spending. That's what the president talks about, John. To invest in infrastructure and such to create.
And he needs a fiscal framework that's going to deal with the deficits that we have out in the out years, and he's put a plan on the table to manage that, to get the debt stabilized and then going down. But he's got to have investments in infrastructure, investment in education, because that's going to power the economy.
But his best argument
you're talking about more spending.
He's put. He is willing to do further cuts in particularly in health care and mandatory programs, but it has to come along with tax rises on the top 2%.
All right, I got to get another break in. More in just a moment.